All right, so we are live, everyone. My name is Jesse, and I am with Exploring by the Seat of Your Pants. For those just joining us for the first time, we are all about bringing conservation, adventure, and science into classrooms around the world. And of course, there are no classrooms right now. All of you guys are stuck at home, so we so appreciate you continuing to join in as we continue to highlight great scientists, explorers, and facilities from around the world. Today, we are joined live all the way from the United Kingdom by James Ketchell. So he has joined us, I think, 10 times over the last few years. He's one of the first people we ever brought on. And every time we bring him on, he has a new story of some epic adventure he has undertaken across the globe. I would introduce him and tell you some of the things he's done, but I know he does it himself, and no one says it better than James. So without further ado, thank you so much for joining us today, James, and take us away.
Thank you ever so much. Right, I'm just going to share the screen again, guys. 2 seconds. Okay. I'm going to bring up my little presentation. Here we are. Where are we? Okay. Okie dokie.
Perfect.
Good morning, everybody. I'm guessing it's morning where you are, and if there is anyone tuning in India or wherever, good evening. I hope you're all keeping safe and well. Really, I'm just going to share some stories of fun and adventure with you. You're probably looking at this motorbike picture, wondering what on earth that's got to do, but it's got quite a lot to do for me. 12 years ago, I raced motorbikes. It was my thing, is what I really enjoyed. I was quite competitive. That can be a bit of a problem when you're on two wheels, because one of two things will either happen. You'll either win or you'll crash trying. Unfortunately, I used to crash quite a bit, but it's okay. You wear this leather suit here. So the idea is when you slide along the tarmac, it stops you from losing all your skin. It's very, very useful. To cut a massively long story short, I was accelerating hard out of a corner. I was chasing someone, and I put a little bit too much power down, and I came off the bike at just over 100 miles an hour. And when the human body hits concrete at just over 100 miles an hour, it can be problematic. I then found myself in hospital for quite some time. For months, I had to just lay there. I was on a special board. I couldn't move. And when I mean I couldn't do a thing, I couldn't do a thing. I actually had to have a nurse wash me. So it wasn't all bad in some respects, but I had to figure out how I was going to try and turn something negative into something positive. And ever since I've been a young little boy, I've always had a dream to try and row a boat across the Atlantic Ocean. But I never really had the guts to do it. I was always waiting for the right time. I was always putting it off and off and off, thinking the next day will be the day that I start, and then the next day, then the next day. But the right time never comes. You've got to make it happen. And I was lying in that hospital bed with the sort of prognosis that it was going to be difficult for me to walk again. And I decided at that moment that was it. I needed something to aim for. I needed a reason as to why I was going to go about doing all my physiotherapy and try and get out of hospital and walk again. So I needed a goal, and that goal was to row across the Atlantic. I managed to get out of hospital. Doesn't really look like me, does it? How do I change the picture? There we go. My hair goes blonde and my beard goes bright ginger, but we all know that ginger is cool, right? There's bound to be lots of ginger people tuning in right now. So that's actually Antigua in the background, in the Caribbean. And I set out from a little island called La Gomera, which is in the Canary Islands, just off the coast of North Africa. And it's the same route, La Gomera to Antigua, or the Caribbean, that Christopher Columbus used back in the late 15th century, I think. And he had 80 crew on board his vessel. And I wanted to do this with someone else, but for some reason, no one would join me. So I had no choice but to do it on my own. It was probably the best decision that I ever made. When I got out there, it was very difficult to begin with. There was a lot of uncertainty. This was my first big expedition. I was very nervous. I was very anxious. I didn't really know if I could do it, to be honest. But I took it just one day at a time. I only focused on getting through one day. I didn't look beyond that. And 110 days later, 4 hours and minutes, not that I was counting, right? I made it to Antigua. And I could talk to you for hours and hours and hours about being out in the Atlantic. I know a thing or two about isolation, about being on my own. It's a tiny little boat, 20 feet long, a tiny little cabin. You'd quite easily get claustrophobic in there after a while, but discipline and routine becomes your best friend when you're stuck in some of these positions. And ultimately, I wanted to be there as well. The wildlife is like something I'll never, ever forget. These huge fin whales swimming in the water, and I was hit in the face by a flying fish, and they really do fly. Sharks followed me. It was just magical. But I only ever set out to do this. I never set out to do anything else. This is all I wanted to do. But when you push yourself outside of your comfort zone and you do something that you have not done before, because remember, there's got to be an action to get a reaction, good things will come your way. Doors of opportunity will just naturally open. And it was during my preparation to row across the Atlantic that I met someone who was also doing it as well. And he had a team member that he was doing it with, and we became really good friends. Now, he happened to be a very accomplished high altitude climber. The guy had been to the top of Mount Everest 5 times, and he asked me if I'd like to go with him. So I only set out to row across the Atlantic, but when I finished, I found myself in a position where I had the opportunity to go out and try and climb the world's highest mountain the following year. And to be really honest, I didn't know if I could do it or not. But the row taught me that you can do a hell of a lot more than you might think you can, if you just take one day at a time and focus on the things that you can control. And I thought, I'll regret it for the rest of my life if I don't try. I don't even know if I can stand on top of the world, but I'll never be in this position again. So I just wanted to try. And I was very lucky. The hardest part was getting to the start line, raising all the funds. I didn't have the money to pay for it myself. So I had to figure out through sponsorship how I was going to do that. I was climbing for a great charity that raised money for very, very poorly sick children. And I also raised money for a charity when I rode across the Atlantic. So I did the same thing again. And it was demoralizing. No one wanted to sponsor me, but I had literally 2 weeks left before I had to pay the bill. And I managed to get the funding to get out to Everest. And on the 16th of May, 2011 at 8:30 in the morning, I stood on top of the world. It doesn't really look like me, does it? Instead of looking, I think I was 29 in this picture, I look like I'm 59, although there's nothing wrong with 59, by the way. And you can see my beard is frozen, and it's a very tough place, if I'm really honest with you. I was able to stand on top of the world because a lot of things came together for me. I had good Sherpas around me. I felt fit and healthy at the time. I had a good weather window. I didn't have any problems with my kit, my oxygen system. And I think there were many people looking down on me because I managed to make it to the top. And but coming back down, things are a little bit harder. I didn't actually know that at base camp I'd picked up a lung infection, and that really started to take hold as I was descending. It's the descent for me and for a lot of people that's actually harder than climbing to the top. But I managed to get down. I got back to the UK, and that's where I actually spent a couple of weeks in hospital because I'd picked up pneumonia. When I was lying in that hospital bed, I couldn't get this one thought out of my head. It kept going round and round and round. And my life had changed a little bit at this point, almost by accident. I was giving talks in schools. I was supporting the scouts, giving talks at scout groups, and companies were offering to pay me to come in and give talks at their sales conferences and things. And here I was, I'd accidentally fallen into a different type of life that I was really enjoying. It made me feel fulfilled and happy and content. And I didn't really know where this adventuring was really going to go. All I knew is I just wanted to continue doing something that I found really interesting. So I then ended up cycling around the world. A year after that, I set out from Greenwich Park in London, where time starts. All my friends joined me for the first day. They quickly cleared off after that. And I made my way through Europe, down through to, I actually ended up in through India and Asia, Australia. And I had a goal, and that was to speak in a school in every single country that I passed through. And this is a school in Bangalore. So if there are any people listening in India, hi, I cycled fairly extensively there. It's a great place. And after that, I headed over to across Australia. There's a whole lot of nothing in the middle of Australia, guys, trust me. But the good news is there's only one road. So you'd have to be a right idiot to get lost. But people do. It's fairly straightforward. I then ended up flying from Brisbane to San Francisco, and then came down to LA, San Diego, and then cycled across to Miami. And at which point I then jumped onto a plane and flew to Lisbon and made it back up to Greenwich Park. You can see here. But things haven't always gone my way. I set out on a project the year after that to row a boat across the Indian Ocean from Western Australia to Mauritius. Now that is 4,000 miles of ocean. It's a long way to row, and it's a different beast to the Atlantic. And unfortunately, we got caught up in some quite bad weather, and myself and my rowing partner had to be rescued. So not everything I've worked on has gone to plan. I've actually been rescued twice. I've been rescued once in the Indian Ocean, and I worked on another project, and I had to be rescued in the Atlantic. So anyone who's got anything worth talking about, and I'm not saying that I do, at some point they're going to have had things go wrong for them, because that's just how life is. You only really find out what you're made of when something goes wrong, and then you have to decide, are you going to give up, or are you going to continue, or what are you going to do about it? So I decided I wanted to keep going at the things that I enjoy. I've always wanted to learn how to fly. I always thought flying was for very intelligent, smart people with lots of money. And I fell very, very short on both those levels. And so I saved up and I learned how to fly gyro planes. So you're going to look at this and think, what on earth is that? Well, that's a mix between a helicopter and a plane. So instead of having a wing above my head, my wing is actually a set of rotors. And once they spin up, they effectively turn into a rotary wing. Now, those rotors above my head are not powered. They spin via the air passing underneath them from my forward motion. So you can see at the back, I have an engine that turns a propeller that produces thrust. It pushes me forward, and wind passes underneath the rotors to keep them spinning. It's called auto rotation. So if you're not quite sure what that means, have a look at what auto rotation means. And it's a very, very simple, easy concept. So I learned how to fly, and I also realized that no one had managed to successfully fly this type of aircraft around the world. It was the last type of aircraft to fly around the world. Every other type of aircraft that was capable of flying around the world had achieved it. So I thought, again, I don't really know if I can do this or not, but I want to have a go. Now, this was very different to the projects that I've worked on in the past. Usually people who fly around the world are people that have been flying their whole life. They have a huge amount of experience. It's generally unheard of for someone to learn how to fly to then fly around the world. That's a bit backwards. It doesn't really work like that in terms of flying, because there's no real substitute for flying experience. You can be the strongest, fittest guy going, but it doesn't mean anything. You need experience, and that only comes with time in the aircraft. So I was very lucky. I managed to get some good people around me, some people who had a lot of flying experience, and I was able to learn from them. There's always someone out there that will help you. Whenever you put yourself out there and say you're going to do something, you may have some people that say, are you crazy? You can't do that. but never ever let that put you off, because you only need one person to believe in you. I was lucky. I had more than one person believe that I could do it. But it was really important to listen to the people who knew what they were talking about. And so I set off. Getting the funding was incredibly difficult again. It took 2 years of full-time work, sending sponsorship emails out, making telephone calls to secure the funding to get the aircraft and actually make this happen. So it was this time, pretty much this time last year, that I set out. And the mission was to fly around the world and inspire 1 million young people to pursue their own goals and dreams, whatever they may be. I didn't want to be just another British lunatic fulfilling my own dreams. And so it was very important that I did the best that I could to do that. So on the first day here, I set off from a little place called Popham in Hampshire. I live in a place called Basingstoke. For those of you who love maps, I love maps and I love charts. If you have a look at where Popham, Popham is, or Basingstoke, that's where I live, that's where I am right now, and that's where I set off from. The first day I had a very easy flight just down to the south coast. Then the following day I worked my way across the channel, the English Channel, to France, where I visited my first school. There was more kids, but these are the ones that I had my picture with. That's in a town called Alençon in France. And from there, I flew over to Germany. I had to go to a place called Leipzig, which is where one of my sponsors was based. That's DHL. So I flew into Leipzig International. It's a big, big airport. And I was able to look at some of their aircraft. They have much bigger engines than I do, as you can see. But it was an amazing experience looking at just how huge these machines are that they fly around the world. And actually a lot of the cargo and a lot of the logistics that's going on in the world right now is being moved by these guys around the world. So when everyone else is asleep at night, not only DHL, the other big carriers, they're the people that are actually really keeping the world moving. It's quite amazing when you look at their operations. It's incredible. After that, I flew into Poland. This is Poland here. Poland was absolutely amazing, beautiful, beautiful scenery. And then after that, I headed up into Lithuania and into Estonia. So my route around the world was, I flew through Europe. It was pretty standard, but then I routed the whole way across Russia. That was just incredible. Just hundreds and hundreds of miles of forests to begin with. People don't realize actually a lot of Russia is all very flat and just forests, hundreds of miles of forests. It's only the last sort of quarter of the country where it really starts to get mountainous in Siberia. And Russia was amazing. You know, I said to people that I'm going into Russia, they said, "Oh my goodness, we'll never see you again." But it's nonsense. They were the nicest people you'll ever meet. I was being given gifts on a regular basis, although I had to turn this down. You can see it's a frozen salmon and a bottle of vodka that had been replaced with whiskey. So that's no real good for me to be consuming as I'm trying to fly an aircraft around the world. But it might have ran my aircraft, to be honest. But they really were just kind, wonderful people. It started to get a lot more mountainous over towards the last sort of 1,000 miles, if you like, of Russia. Now, it was nearly 6,000 miles across Russia. So people, you just can't comprehend how big the country really is. And you can see the aircraft that I'm flying is an open cockpit aircraft. So it's very cold and you're really exposed, but it's probably one of the best ways you could ever fly. You look out over the side and you can see down, and it's just absolutely magical. This is a school in Siberia that I spoke at, and you can see there's a few girls here. There's one in particular, one little girl who just smiled at me for about an hour. And I'll never ever see her or those children again. I just hope they remember the day that that British lunatic came in to meet them and share stories of fun and adventure, because I will never forget them. So hopefully they don't forget the visit. This is going out across the Bering Straits, out through Siberia. See, a lot of people, they would ask me, how do you fly a gyro across the Pacific? Now, that's a very valid question. And the answer is you can't really fly a gyro across the Pacific. So how I cross the international date line to go from the east to the west is you actually cross at the Bering Straits. Now, there's only, I think it was 46 nautical miles from Russia to America, to Alaska. So people don't realize it is that close. When you take off in Russia, it's not that long. You can see the mountains in Alaska. It's incredible. And this is, I think, if my memory is correct, this is coming out around Providencia Bay, and you have the Bering Straits in front of us. Now, this is in the height of the summer, and you can still see that it's pretty cold. If you were here in the winter, it would be -60, -70. So that just wouldn't be possible for me to fly in. It would be too cold, and it would be no good. But there was only a tight weather window to get across here, and that was really the sort of summer months. Once I got into America, it was fairly straightforward, to be honest. I flew down, first of all, I flew to Nome, and then down the coast through Canada. And I actually had to make an emergency landing in Canada. It was a particular day where the clouds were starting to come in lower. It was raining, and it wasn't ideal to be up in an aircraft. I needed to land. Now, my destination airport was only 10 miles away, but in front of me, this huge bolt of lightning came down, and I had to turn around. But when I turned around to go back to the previous airport, still in Canada, the cloud had sort of descended and below, and I was stuck basically. So I had no choice but to land on a road. I landed on this road and sort of pulled into a truck stop. Now, the road wasn't busy, and I pulled into the truck stop, and it was like a scene out of a James Bond film. People were looking at me thinking, what the hell is this thing that's just come descending out of the sky? But luckily I was able to refuel, and actually I carried on the following day. I just want to go back because this is a really interesting picture here, guys. You might find this interesting. In the middle of the Bering Straits between Russia and Alaska, you have two islands, and they're called, this one that we're looking at now, the bigger one of the two is Big Diomede, and the smaller one is Little Diomede. Now, Big Diomede belongs to Russia, and Little Diomede belongs to America. And the dateline, the international dateline, runs in between the two of them. So you really are at the end of the world when you're crossing here. It's incredible. I then, as you say, flew pretty much down the coast, managed to fly over some spectacular scenery. You can see that's the famous Golden Gate Bridge there in the background. Now, when I got down to the sort of west coast of America, down around to the San Francisco area, I needed to, if I had flown from the west coast to the east coast and then back across into Greenland, Iceland, and Scotland, I would have arrived home short of mileage. So I needed to fly a little bit more miles in the US. Now, at this point, I'd already cycled across America twice, and I have a bit of a soft spot for the US. It's a great place, and I've been very, very lucky. People have been very kind and generous to me. So I thought, wouldn't it be a great idea to land in every single mainland state when I flew across America? Now, as you know, there's 49 of them. I couldn't fly to the 50th Hawaii. That's out of my range. But I landed in every single US state when I made my way across America, and it was incredible. I'll continue with some of the pictures. I flew down to, you can see in the background that there is the Hollywood sign there, Hollywood Hills. And this is an interesting one here, the next picture. This is flying over LAX International Airport. And I thought it's pretty amazing here. I'm in this tiny little aircraft and I'm flying over jumbo jets and aircraft that have flown halfway around the world. And there's me flying right over it. And it was actually quite easy because there's a corridor designed for light aircraft like mine and others to transit across the airspace. So you can fly from north to south and south to north, but each time you do it, you have to be at a different altitude. So there's separation, but it was very, very straightforward, to be honest. After that, I basically zigzagged the whole way across America. I mean, I could talk to you for hours and hours and hours and hours about all the different places that I visited and the different experiences that I had. You will all obviously recognize this picture. I had to pinch myself flying around the Statue of Liberty. I flew a little bit lower than I probably should have. There were people looking up at me from the ground, probably thinking, what the hell is that thing? Because the aircraft is quite loud, they are quite noisy. And then you can see the Manhattan, the New York skyline in front of me. And I had to pinch myself because 2 years prior to this, I didn't even have a pilot's license. And here I was, 3/4 of the way around the world, now heading into, a few days after this, I had to head up into Canada to cross over into Greenland and Iceland and back down to the UK. So Greenland, wow, that is a beautiful place. So just to let you know, I left Canada from a little place called Iqaluit. And I flew 500 nautical miles across to Nuuk, which is the capital of Greenland. And I was unable to fly across Greenland because it was too high. The ice cap itself is nearly 10,000 feet high. So I had to fly around the edge right down to the south and then round the other side. And Greenland itself is quite mountainous, as you can see here. So I wouldn't fly over these, I just flew sort of through them. And then that got me over to a place called Kulusuk. And from there, I flew across to, where did I fly? Flew across to Reykjavik. That was quite a long stretch, 400 nautical miles. And then from there, it was all pretty straightforward, really. I stopped off at the Faroe Islands. That's in between Iceland and Scotland. And I was able to get home. And I got back on the 22nd of September last year. And to be honest, it still hasn't sunk in that I've somehow flown around the world. But I can tell you one thing, if you're prepared to put the effort in and commit to something and make the effort to do something, you can do a lot more than you perhaps think that you really can. And if you had said to me when I was maybe 15, 16, 17 years old, I'd be sitting here in nearly 20 years time, not quite 20, sorry, 15 years time, telling stories of climbing Mount Everest and rowing boats across oceans and being rescued, and now telling stories of flying around the world, I'd say that's not going to ever happen to me. But unless I'm dreaming, I am here talking to you all. And every single one of you young people out there watching this and listening to this, I absolutely promise you, you have the capability inside you to do anything you want to do. It's out there waiting for you. The only thing between where you are now and where you want to be, and whatever your dream is, it doesn't matter what you do. The only thing between you is just a little bit of work. That's it. If you're prepared to do the work, you'll be amazed at what you can really achieve. And the world is an amazing place. I know sometimes we go through ups and downs, a little bit difficult now because we're all sort of stuck in and a little bit frustrated. But there will be an opposite to this. And there's no better time to be alive. There's no better time to be coming into this world. It's full of opportunity. Anything you like, you can go and do. If you're good at something, you'll be able to find a way of turning that into a living. With the birth of the internet, hence what we're doing now, there really is an abundance of opportunity out there that perhaps wasn't there many years ago. So yeah, I just wanted to share a few stories of fun and adventure with you guys. And I think I've spoken for about half an hour now. So I said I'd just share a few stories. So if you're interested, guys, we can do some questions. So if I stop sharing the screen and come back, I think that's how it's going to work, right?
Perfect. You're right. You got it. And we'll make sure that we get that information so that people can see what website and your social media handles and everything else. But James, as always, what a fantastic talk. You know, it's fun watching the YouTube chat bar when you give a presentation because it's just this constant stream of wow, amazing, and all caps and oh my God. And, yeah, and teachers smiling like mad the whole time as well. So we are joined by a whole bunch of people today. For groups on YouTube, type in your questions. Let me know where you're joining from. I'll take as many as possible. We are joined live by a few teachers now. So I'm going to go to them first and take some questions from them. Miss Kenny students, thanks so much for raising your hand virtually, and we'll come to you guys as well. But first, I want to go to Miss Malley's group in Milton. So Miss Malley, if you want to pass along a question from your class, you are unmuted. Go for it.
Well, you talked about the height you could fly. What was the highest you could fly compared to a normal airplane?
Yeah. So what was the highest I could fly? So the actual altitude record for a gyro plane, which is the same type of aircraft I have, is actually 28,000 feet. But I never flew that high. That record was set by a woman, fantastic aviator, and she's very small and light, much lighter than I am. So I only flew up to 11,000 feet, and that was in Wyoming.
Okay.
But that's quite high.
That is quite high with an open cockpit, especially. All right, I want to go to Miss Christensen in Lake Elmo, Minnesota. Let's come to you guys and go for it.
Hi, thank you so much for this great adventure today. So I was just kind of curious about how you adjusted with the gyrocopter for the different heights and any kind of like weather systems.
Yeah, okay, so there's a particular app that I used for all of my weather when I went around the world, which was really, really accurate. I'll tell you what it is. It's called Windy, W-I-N-D-Y. It's called Windy. It's really, really good. It gives you the winds at different altitudes, and it will give you the levels of precipitation, cloud cover, at what's the cloud base. So forecasting now is really, really good. And I was very lucky. I had a team, I had a couple of people back home who were tracking me. So every time I flew, I had a tracker so followers could follow me. But I also had people that were watching me and watching weather systems and making sure I was kind of okay. Although I was physically on my own in the aircraft and I traveled around the world, there were sort of people on the ground back in the UK whom, if it wasn't for them, it would have been very, very difficult to have gone around the world. They organized the permissions and things. And so it kind of, whilst I was on my own, it was kind of a team effort, really. But the actual weather was not difficult. There was one day that I got caught out, and that was actually quite a difficult one. That was coming back across Greenland to Iceland, where the cloud descended very low and it was very thick and it was raining. And I've never been so pleased to see land in my life. But yeah, that wasn't too difficult. I just took it one flight at a time because it's very overwhelming. You know, I flew 170 odd flights. So if you look at that as a whole, it just blows your brain apart. You can't comprehend, it's too much. But every day I just said one flight today, one flight. And sure enough, that's how I got around the world. Yeah.
By the way, if you're not being paid by the Windy app, that is like the greatest, call out of all time. Everyone agrees with me. That's
They don't pay me. I wish they did, but it was very, very useful. There are other apps as well, but that was pretty good.
Hey, it worked for you, and that's fantastic. Awesome. All right, I'm going to go to Andres. If you have a question, come on up, man. And Miss Kenny.
Have you ever passed out from going too high?
Have I ever passed out from going too high? Thankfully, I have not. That would be a little bit of a problem if I was the pilot and I passed out. But you'd have to go really, really, really high for that to happen. So in the UK, legally, I can't fly above 10,000 feet. Otherwise, you need to have oxygen. And I would never fly that high. The advantages of the type of aircraft that I flew around the world meant that actually I could fly quite low. And one of the things that I realized, when you start flying very high, the view is not so good anymore. It's like you're looking at Google Maps. You may as well just be looking on a computer. So flying a little bit lower is nicer. You can get a sense of, you can see cars and you can see detail that you wouldn't see if you were flying higher up. So when I flew around the world, my average height was about between 800 and 1,000 feet above the ground. But if the ground was already at 7,000 or 8,000 feet, like in Wyoming, that's when I was flying at 8, 9, 10,000 feet. But I was never more than 1,000 feet above the ground. Does that make sense?
Yeah, fantastic. How cool is that? All right, we get this question every time. We got it from a teacher on YouTube. So Miss Merrifield wants to know, do you have plans for any future adventures?
Massive plans. So there's no human being on this planet who's circumnavigated the globe via air, sea, and land. So I have managed to do 2 of those. I've flown around the world, and so that's air, and I've cycled around the world, so that's land. So there's one more left for me, which I'll be working on.
Hint, hint, nudge, nudge. Okay, so we're going to bring on that presentation in a few years. Once you've done the expedition, we'll come back in 2024 and highlight all your epic adventures, part 4. Awesome. All right. I'm going to go to Sophia for a question. You have your hand raised. Welcome in, and go for it.
What was your favorite place to go to when you were flying around the world?
No pressure.
Hi, Sophia. Oh, okay. Everywhere that I visited was magical. A place is made up of the people, and there were lots of areas where the scenery was very stunning, but it's all very different. I mean, America is like 5 or 6 different countries in one. The different scenery, the different landscapes. But everywhere I landed, I was treated so well. So it's hard to select one place and say that was the best. I probably have the most memories from America because I spent a lot of time there. And trust me, it's a very, very big place. And to fly through every single state takes quite a long time. So I have very good memories from there. But Russia was also incredible. So it was all very good. So I know that doesn't answer your question, like what's the best, but it's hard to. It's also very different. When you're older, you can fly around the world, and then I want to read your book, and then you can tell me what you thought was the best.
Fantastic. Well, we, again, from the YouTube comments, we do have a few kids that are going to fly around the world, apparently. So you were going to have competition. Maybe they'll set the speed record this time.
I'll help them.
Fantastic. I'm sure you will, James. All right, Ms. Gertson joining us on YouTube wants to know, do you have to file a flight plan with each country's authorities on each step of your journey?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. For Russia, yes, but I had like a Russian agent, which sounds very James Bond, but who files the flight plans for me, and that made it a bit easier. In America, no, you don't need to. I can just take off, and same with Canada, I just take off and go. But there's different levels of airspace, so you can't just fly through. As long as you stay clear of controlled airspace, you can pretty much fly wherever you want. You don't necessarily need to talk to anyone on the radio, but if you want to go through some controlled airspace, then you need to talk to an air traffic controller on the radio, which is very easy to do. All the things that I was nervous about when I embarked on my flight around the world turned out to not be a problem at all. Yeah. And one of those things was the radio work and flight plan, filing flight plans and flying somewhere I shouldn't have, that it actually ended up being quite simple.
Amazing. One thing that you always highlight in your talks, and we get this from a lot of our international speakers, is this idea of international cooperation and the friendliness of people anywhere you go on this planet, which is something I love every time you highlight so fervently. So thanks, James. All right. I know we could take like a bajillion questions. We're going to take 3 more. I'm going to go back to Miss Mally first, and then Miss Christensen. I'm going to take 1 more from YouTube. And I know we could take 200 questions, and I apologize for that. But Miss Mally, come on up for now. And if you have a second question, take us away.
Well, actually, I did have one, but it was answers. I'm just going through and seeing. I guess, what was the scariest moment during your trip? Did you have a moment that really sticks out for you?
Yeah, when I was flying around the world, the scariest moment was flying back across the Atlantic Ocean from Greenland to Iceland. And I could hardly see where I was going, which is a very big problem. I don't have an autopilot. I have to fly the aircraft myself. And so I'm using instruments to fly it as opposed to seeing where I'm going. I knew I was above the ocean. And that's quite a scary situation to be in, but I was very lucky. I had some good training from people before I left, and that was the only time I thought, my goodness, I really hope that I'm able to land. And when I arrived in Iceland, this goes to show that maybe there is a higher power, because the only place that wasn't fogged in, as in fog to the ground, there was the airfield. So that was everything around the airfield had fog coming right down to the ground. I wouldn't have been able to fly into it. I would have been in real trouble. So I guess maybe it was meant to be, but that was probably the scariest part, was the uncertainty and not knowing what it was going to be like when I arrived at my destination. I couldn't turn around because I didn't have enough fuel. So I knew that I had to land somewhere, and the only place that wasn't fogged in was the airport itself. So I was very lucky. So that was quite a scary moment.
Yeah, that's a memory that'll last forever. I mean, I'm sure the whole thing will, but as you said, it's hard to process the totality of this whole journey, but that's something that's quite the story. We're glad you got there, and we're glad that happened near the end, right? Like, if that happens on day 1, that's kind of a really sketchy experience, but right near the end, it's like, I'm so close to home. One more leg. A quick follow-up question, because it's the one on YouTube, from Paige, wanted to know, how long did 1 can of gas, so to speak, last you? So if you fill up the tank, how far can you go?
So I had I had 2 tanks. I had an extra tank sit in the back seat. So if I filled both tanks up, I could fly. You don't measure it on how far, you measure it on, you don't measure it on distance, you measure it on time, because the wind and the conditions will affect how far you go. So the maximum time that I could fly would have been about 8 hours. And my longest flight once, I think, was about 7 hours. So I had capacity to fly in a long time. And in that time, the longest flight I flew was about 500 nautical miles. Wow. So that's quite a long way.
Yeah, fantastic. All right, we're going to take one last question from Miss Christensen. So if you want to come up and wrap us up, go for it.
I was just curious, one of my students had asked about how to know where you landed in different, like each of the different states. Do you have a map or a book that shows each of the specific locations?
Yeah, again, great question. So I used particular software that pilots use that will give you a directory of all the different airports. So I will look on a map, like an aviation chart, and it will point out all the different airfields. Now, you don't want to fly into a big international airport that's too big. It's just a bit of a pain. So you want to select somewhere a little bit smaller, that's a bit more of a local community airfield. That's where you'll be able to land very easily and get help and support. So prior to flying around the world, my sort of flight team that helped me, we planned out roughly where we think we would go. And before I left, I would never just take off wondering where I'm going to get to, hoping that there might be somewhere to land. You have to have a plan and know where you're flying that day. And you also have to have alternate airfields. So if airfield, your first choice, for some reason you can't land there or there's bad weather, you have to know that you've got other options. But it's all that element of it is quite straightforward once you know where to look and stuff. So it's all the planning and preparation. Is the actual flying from A to B, if I'm honest, was quite easy.
Yeah. James, again, you mentioned several times in your talk that you could talk hundreds of hours about each element of your journey, each leg of the journey. And so for kids that want to ask more questions, where can they go to learn more about you, your expeditions, maybe send questions to you directly? Where can we send all our really excited
so you can tweet me or Instagram, at Ketchell James is Instagram, and at Captain Ketch is Twitter, or just go onto my website and send me an email. My website is plastered all over it. I'll always get back to anyone. There's also on my YouTube channel, I made videos when I flew around the world. So if you want to watch some of the flying videos, just go and watch them. And actually, just before you leave, if anyone is interested, I'm writing a new book at the moment, but my current one, The Ultimate Triathlon, is still available. So if you're stuck indoors, as I'm guessing a lot of you are, and you're looking for something to read, you can either download it off, I think Amazon, you can download it off there, or you can actually, these books are being sent out, and if you like, I can sign it for you. You just have to put it in the comments. So get your mum and dad to get you one, kids, and I'll sign it for you and send them out.
How cool is that? Well, thank you as always, Ketch. We so appreciate you joining us today. To our teachers joining live across Ontario, Minnesota, and all across on YouTube, thank you so much for joining us today, and have a wonderful rest of your day, everyone. And go out there and row an ocean, or cycle the world, or gyrocopter around the world, or maybe join James as he goes by sea. There's all sorts of opportunities out there.
Exactly. It doesn't matter what you do. If everyone did what I did, the world would be a crazy place. And every young person is very good at something. And when you find out what you're good at, just go and take it and run with it, and just do as much as you can. And I'd like to say thank you to everyone who tuned in and listened to me. And yeah, stay safe and happy and well. And I look forward to sharing more adventures with you soon, guys.
Outstanding. Well, have a wonderful rest of your day, everyone. Bye for now.